This is the Law 401 podcast, legal issues decoded for you, brought to you by Roger Williams University School of Law. Hi, welcome back to Law 401 Legal Issues Decoded. My name is Nicole. I'm a lawyer. I'm a librarian. I'm a podcast co-host, and I am a Rhode Islander who loves Rhode Island. And I'm here with my non-Rhode Island podcast co-host, Michael.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm Nicole's podcast host. I'm the non-lawyer. And today we're going to talk about tariffs in the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court recently ruled in Learning Resources Incorporated versus Trump that the president exceeded his authority when imposing certain tariffs under a federal emergency statute.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. Tariffs might be a bit technical, maybe a bit boring, and this might be. But tariffs affect the price of goods, and this ruling affects who has the power to impose them.
And at its core, this case is about constitutional structure, the balance of authority between Congress and the president when it comes to major economic decisions.
And today we're going to raise the most important question: what does this have to do with Rhode Island and Rhode Islanders?
And to help us unpack it, we've invited back our colleague and, yes, our boss, Dean Gregory Bowman, who's been on before to discuss tariffs.
And we're going to grill him.
We are going to grill him. Welcome, Dean Bowman.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you back.
I'm happy to be here.
So you were here when we first started the podcast to talk about tariffs in season 1, and I guess I'm curious about what's changed.
Well, what's changed is not much has changed in the sense that the tariff landscape is very unpredictable. Under the current administration, tariffs go up, tariffs go down, tariffs are started, tariffs are stopped. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods, so it makes it hard to predict what the cost of things are, and it makes it hard for businesses to plan and invest.
All right, so when we're talking today about this case that Michael talked about, which we'll put the opinion in the show notes, are we really talking about a separation of powers issue? Are we talking about a international trade issue? What is the big picture?
Yes and yes. It is. This really is at its heart a separation of powers case, and it's also a foreign affairs power case. And it should be telling that there are 7 different opinions in this case from 9 justices on the Supreme Court.
So very little unanimity.
There is a 6-3 decision to strike down the tariffs, but there are a lot of differences of opinion as to whether this is simply a foreign affairs power of the president, whether this is something that is a major question that Congress has to very clearly delegate to the president. Is it something that is not a presidential power at all? Is it simply a matter of statutory interpretation?
So we took a lot of roads to get to where we are right now.
A lot of roads and 170 pages in 7 different opinions.
Did you read the whole thing?
I read the whole thing.
So
wow.
I stayed awake for most of it too. So
So since you've gone so deep on this, can you tell us what the IEEPA is in plain English?
Sure. Well, first I will tell you how trade lawyers talk about it.
Oh my gosh, is it called IEPA? IEPA? IEPA?
IEPA.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And the other statute that is referenced a lot in the decision is the Trading with the Enemy Act, which is TWIA.
The Trading with the Enemy Act?
TWIA.
TWIA
and IEPA.
I like Trading with the Enemy because it sounds like that Julia Roberts.
I was going to say that.
With the enemy. Trading with the Enemy is going to be like the sequel.
Yeah.
And TWIA. Okay. TWIA and IEPA.
Yeah. So the long story short is that since World War II, most
we're going way back.
Trade
that
sanctions once upon a time. So there were trade sanctions that were imposed and import restrictions imposed and export restrictions imposed under the Trading with the Enemy Act. And then after Watergate, that was bifurcated into the Trading with the Enemy Act for sanctions and restrictions during wartime and the International Emergency Economic Powers Act for emergency restrictions during peacetime. So in order to have an emergency, once a year, the president has to declare it. They can only last for 1 year under the statute. So every year on a certain date, the president, since 1979, for example, recertifies that there's an emergency with respect to Iran. And so the trade sanctions for Iran continue, and there's certain import restrictions that also continue. So most of my career In practice, I practiced for 10 years before I became a law professor. And I did a lot of import and export, trade sanctions, money laundering, anti-bribery work. And
you did a lot of money laundering? What was that like?
Yeah, I did a lot of anti-money laundering work. Let me be clear. But the most of the work I did, the primary statutory authority was IEPA.
Okay, so one is about ongoing wars. Since it was split into like two statutory structures. One is about wars.
To clarify a little bit, there was one trade sanction. There was one emergency authority, primary emergency authority statute. So the Cuban sanctions are still under that, but everything since 1977 has been under IEPA because we're not technically at war.
So for those of us who might not have been alive in 1977, what was going on in 1977? I absolutely will. Thank you.
There was a lot of pulling back of power from the executive branch by the legislative branch post Watergate. So there were efforts to restrict presidential power and to provide certain conditions on the exercise of certain presidential power. So one of the key questions in this case was the International Emergency Economic Powers Act gives a lot of broad authority to the president to restrict imports and exports. But it doesn't use the word tariff. It doesn't use the word tax. So the question was, the president could have restricted imports from, say, China on an emergency basis. But the question is, could the president reduce them or raise revenue by imposing a really high tariff on them? And according to the majority in the court's decision in this case, the answer is no.
So what exactly does the current case say about IEPA? What did the majority hold?
Well, there was a majority with multiple concurrences, so they reached the same result from different angles. But the gist is that the president under IEPA doesn't have the authority to impose emergency tariffs. The president can take other actions to restrict imports, but can't impose tariffs under that statute. Now, your next question should be, are there other statutes? And the answer is yes, right? And the I believe it was the Chief Justice made clear there are other statutory provisions that could be used. And of course, in dissent, Justice Kavanaugh says there are other provisions that could have been used, so why not just let this stand? I don't agree with that reasoning, but there are lots of other ways that the president can continue to impose increased tariffs. And in fact, they continue to be imposed. And some of those are probably legitimate.
So they're saying the president can impose tariffs, but this is not the statute to do it with.
This is not the statute to do it. That's right. And what's interesting here is if this case hadn't been about tariffs, if it had been about other import restrictions or other emergency restrictions, we probably wouldn't have had this case. The fact that it was about tariffs, and tariffs are taxes, and taxes, that's the first thing listed in the congressional powers in Article 1 of the Constitution, the power to tax, right? So the idea here is the president does not have the power to tax unless Congress has expressly delegated that to him or her.
So when the president passes a tariff, declares a tariff, puts a tariff into effect, does the president say, and this is the statute that I am doing it under?
Mm-hmm. It's by executive order. Yeah, it's executive orders from the president, by the authority vested in me by the Constitution and certain statutory provisions, including I hereby determine there's an emergency, we need tariffs, they're going to be this % on this country or on particular types of goods. Yeah.
So can the president just rip that one up and write a new one that says,
yes,
there's an emergency, and under the Constitution and these other statutes, and then it has to go through the whole court system again?
Yeah. I mean, so Justice Kavanaugh, that was his dissent, his basic argument in a lot of pages was this is a foreign affairs power. The president has the foreign affairs power. And so therefore, the president can do this. Full stop. And Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the court, and then concurrences by others, it is not a foreign affairs power. It may be what's called a major question it's a big question that you have to answer expressly, or it's just a matter of statutory interpretation.
Sorry, it's called major questions.
The major questions doctrine.
Is there a minor questions doctrine?
No. That's just statutory interpretation.
So for our audience at home, who's mostly not lawyers,
Yeah.
if there's a decision issued from the court with, what did you say, 7 different concurrences or dissents at this point?
Yep.
How do we interpret what the overall ruling is?
That's a really good question. And the answer is it takes time. I mean, the official holding by the court is in the opinion of the court, which here was written by the Chief Justice. Okay. And whenever the Chief Justice is in the majority, the Chief gets to decide who writes the opinion. And when the Chief is not in the minority, the senior most justice decides who writes the opinion.
Which is a sneaky power to have.
It's a sneaky power to have.
Because you can assign the opinion to someone that you don't like, or you can assign the opinion to somebody who's like the weakest the weakest person in the majority, so they have to like really flesh it out when they don't really want to or don't really know what they agree on. It's like a sneaky power.
So the Chief Justice is really the chief strategist of the court.
Yes. And for years, Chief Justice Roberts was the swing vote. So he wielded an enormous power there when he was right in the middle. So it will take years. I'll tell you one interesting story. One of the other big presidential emergency powers cases in history is Youngstown Sheet and Tube, which comes from 1952 during the Korean War. The president.
I was about to say what was happening in 1952.
Yeah. So before you were born. The steel mills, there were threats of strikes by workers. It's the middle of the Korean War. So President Truman decides, well, I should try to nationalize the steel mills because it's essential to national security that steel continues to be produced. And the court in Youngstown Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer said no. And everybody said, well, yay, that's a real win for the courts. But in actuality, all the justices said the president does have emergency power, and it took years for us to figure out which was the most important decision in that case, and it wasn't the majority.
So this could take years.
It could take years. That's a long-winded professorial answer to a short question.
It depends.
So is it fair to say that the court is increasingly insisting that Congress must be explicit when major economic authority is involved?
I don't know.
It's really that unclear.
It's that unclear. I mean, some of the justices in the majority, they thought this was just a statutory interpretation case. And one of the takeaways for me is that we have a rule of law system that works really well, but we don't know how to interpret statutes. We can't agree. We have no system for figuring out what a law says.
And that seems to be the overriding narrative in the media anyways, that this is a pushback on congressional authority versus executive power. But you didn't see that when you read the cases.
I think if this had been a case not about tariffs, I think it would have gone differently.
Interesting.
I think it's very narrow in that sense.
So then what's the takeaway from, I saw a lot in the media. This is going to be really nerdy. To prepare for this episode, last night I listened to the Dahlia Lithwick podcast about this case while I was falling asleep. What is the message that the case is sending? Because it seemed like there was a mic drop moment here, but what is the message we're supposed to take away from this? That
can I say
a happy message?
Can I say it depends? I mean, on the one hand, yes, the court stepped up and said the president exceeded presidential authority. Good. So number one. But number two, it's pretty narrow. Number three, they can't agree precisely on the reason why. And number four, this took years. I don't think this shifts the balance of power between the executive branch and the judicial branch much at all. At all.
So why should a Rhode Islander care at this point about this case?
I think that Rhode Islanders should continue to be concerned about a lack of predictability in what things are going to cost. I think businesses should be worried about knowing whether their supply chains are going to be secure, whether their prices are going to go up. I think Rhode Islanders who go to the store should be concerned about how much their stuff is going to cost in the grocery store, at an automotive dealer, at a furniture store. I think it continues to be really unpredictable. I mean, the theater of the politics here, right, is really fun to watch, right? It's fun to watch the court come out and say to a president, no. And you do see that tension between the branches of government, and it's interesting. And of course, the president was not happy at all. But I just don't think it shifts the power that much, and I think we're going to continue to see a lot of unpredictability. I think what we're seeing, honestly, with this case is you're seeing an unraveling of the world international trade order, and that is going to mean that things are going to be more unpredictable. That means it's going to be harder to invest for companies. It's going to be
this is a real doom and gloom.
It's a doom and I wanted to bring the joy, and I forgot it. I left it at home. But I think we are seeing an undoing of a lot of the predictability of the world trade order that has resulted in things being way cheaper now than they were 40 years ago.
So, can you just go back a little bit to what is a concurrence and what is a dissent?
Yes.
Because I don't know that everybody who listens to that will necessarily appreciate the difference.
No, that's a great point. So the court's opinion is written by whoever the chief assigns or the senior most judge assigns. That's the opinion of the court, and a lot of times you'll have a unanimous decision, or you'll have a couple of people in dissent. The court's opinion is the official opinion, and then others might say, I agree with the result, but my reasoning is different, so I concur. And then those justices or judges on an appellate court below the Supreme Court who disagree say, I dissent. I disagree. It was the wrong outcome, and here's why.
So does this happen all the time?
Yeah, it does, especially at the Supreme Court.
Are they just not an agreeable bunch?
It's actually been a lot of fun. I go down once a year to move the admission of some of our law school's alums.
Sorry, what does move the admission mean?
I go there, and I'm a member of the Supreme Court Bar, and I ask the court to allow, fancy, good job, to admit some of our graduates to practice before the U.S. Supreme Court.
Have you ever practiced before the Supreme Court?
I have filed briefs in a tariff case.
Of course.
Of course you did. Yeah. Okay, so I want to know about practical next things. I realize you just said that it's going to be years before we really know what's going on, but if tariffs were imposed under a statute that the court said doesn't authorize them, what happens to the people who paid the tariffs? Do they get their money back?
They're supposed to get their money back.
Has this happened before?
Yes.
Tell us all about it.
Okay, so the case I worked on was actually an export tax case. Now, under the Constitution, export taxes are unconstitutional. And we kind of forgot that. So the government decided to tax.
What do you mean we forgot it? I didn't.
Congress forgot it.
Okay, all right.
And so they passed this.
This was like a hidden statute in the Constitution.
What do you mean they forgot it?
It's right there. It says you can tax imports, but you can't tax exports. And it's right there. And so Congress decided to help maintain ports by having a harbor maintenance tax.
Do you know who I blame? I blame the librarians.
I do too.
Could no one have gone to a librarian and been like, hey, is there something here in the Constitution about this?
So they had years and years of these taxes, and this got litigated all the way to the Supreme Court and got overturned. And so thousands of businesses got refunded billions of dollars. And it was a mess. Now, I say mess because at least in two opinions in this case, the government's statement that if we have to refund these tariffs, it will be a quote unquote mess. That was said. And it's going to be. It's going to take a while, but you're supposed to get your money back. And FedEx has filed suit in federal court to get those monies back and has pledged that it will refund all customs tariffs that it collected to its customers.
And those are the businesses, right? But
individuals too.
Individuals to consumers. Is there precedent for consumers getting money back in these kinds of situations?
Wait, I'm sorry. now I'm in it. So if I bought something from a different country and do they charge me the tariff, or
Yes.
they charge the tariff to the company I bought it from, which then makes the cost go up?
They charge it to They charge it to, well, it depends, right? But it usually, for FedEx, for example, and I say this because I bought something last year in Portugal that should have been duty free and wasn't. So it got shipped to me by FedEx. And then they sent me a bill for the tariffs.
It's refund time in the Bowman house.
And I paid it. And now I'm going to watch very closely.
Oh, wow.
For my refund check.
So what's your gut instinct? Do you think we'll actually see refunds as consumers?
Some. It'll take a while. I'm not very high on their list of priorities.
No.
But they individuals should too. That's right. So, and if you had bought something and brought it back in your suitcase and declared it, then you might have had to pay a tariff at the point of entry to get it in, and you would be entitled to a refund.
So this court decision has real impacts on the average person.
And that's why Rhode Islanders should care.
So we're a small trade-exposed state. We rely on imports for all types of things, which I think you mentioned before, construction materials, consumer goods, industrial components. Why does clarity about tax authority particularly matter for Rhode Islanders?
Look, if you want to have a business built here and you want to build it, and you're going to build it out of what? You're going to build it out of steel, you're going to build it out of wood, other materials. How much do those materials cost? If you know what the tariff is and it stays the same, it's predictable. If it could be 0% today and 145% tomorrow, which happened with some countries in the world, right?
145%?
You're out of business. And if you don't know what it's going to be, maybe you don't build here. Maybe you build in Canada. Maybe you build in Mexico. Maybe you just don't bother doing it at all. That costs Rhode Island jobs. It costs it money. It costs it taxes, revenue. That could be very hurtful in the long run. And again, we're only a year and a half, 2 years into this, so we'll have to see how it plays out. But that unpredictability is really problematic, and that's the part that has me the most worried.
So are smaller states or even smaller importers more impacted by the volatility of all of this?
Not necessarily. I think a lot of it's going to come down to what is the margin in your business, right? So if you're in a construction industry where the margins are not that big, it's going to affect you widely, right? If you're in a business where the margin is pretty high, let's say AI, right? Maybe you can absorb that, maybe not even pass all of it on to the customer. But it really depends on the industry, and it depends on how much you're willing to have lowered profits.
So are you kind of saying that there's sort of two problems? One is the tariff, and the other is the volatility.
Yes.
And so we kind of, as consumers, but also potentially small business owners or people who want to build a house or people who are related to people who are in construction, or we should be keeping track of not only what the tariff situation is, but also how volatile it could potentially be going forward.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. I mean, when I went to law school, got my master's in economics and international economics, one of the things that was...
Did you see how he slid that in there?
You did.
Yeah.
International economics.
International economics. So, but this was my bread and butter in terms of my career and what I really believed in. And part of the reason I got into that was because, you provide for prosperity and wealth and jobs and health by lowering the cost of things. And that's what the World Trade Organization has done. And if you look on the World Trade Organization's website, they talk about predictability and lower prices and prosperity.
They have a fabulous website. As a researcher,
they have
WTO is just a very well built out website.
And I think that's right. I think that mission's right. And tariffs going up and down and yo-yoing all over the place sort of blow that up. And so when I say this may be the unraveling of the World Trade Order and the prosperity that is built, we may be seeing the very beginning of that. Because I think that once it's clear that a president has the authority to just ramp things up as an emergency power, and no matter what we agreed to with whatever countries years ago when they invested, we can just change that on, and turn on a dime, that makes that system not very valuable at all.
So for the average Rhode Islander, I should say, what is the bottom line takeaway from this case that you think they should walk away from this podcast today with?
If you bought anything and imported it, you should check to see whether you're eligible for a refund. I would watch the news and see what happens with tariffs, and I would be very mindful of increased volatility and how that's going to affect growth in this country. And it's not just Rhode Island. I think it's all across the country.
So, if you read the decisions, as it turns out, it seems like authority is shifting more clearly back to Congress, and Rhode Island has a federal delegation. What role do they have? What have they said about this?
I mean, our senators?
Yeah.
Well, they're pretty high ranking, and they have a lot of influence and impact. I'm sure they think this opinion is right. I think it's right. I think the outcome is right. I'm hopeful that they can help to guide Congress to provide more clarity in statutes as to what the president can and can't do. And what's really interesting is Justice Gorsuch, in his concurrence, he said that. He sort of called out Congress and said, look, a lot of the lack of clarity here is about, it's not clear what Congress wants and doesn't. Congress can step in. Congress has power if it chooses to wield it, and it hasn't. So I think that having our members of Congress in both houses leading to provide for greater clarity and consistency in U.S. trade policy would be really, really good for Rhode Islanders, for their pocketbooks, and for their prosperity.
So I think one of the things that's fascinated a lot of people about this case is the fact that 3 justices on the so-called conservative side stepped out, and 2 of them were actually appointed by President Trump. That was Amy Coney Barrett and was it Gorsuch?
Gorsuch and Barrett concurred.
So what do you think that signals, if anything, about where the court's going?
I think that signals judicial independence. I mean, they spoke their minds regardless of who nominated them, and I give them credit for that. So and you see this again and again in history. Somebody's appointed by a particular president, and they evolve in different and unexpected ways. They have the independence to call balls and strikes as they see them, and they do. And I think that's good.
I would just like to point out that my favorite Supreme Court justice of all time, John Paul Stevens, was exactly as you described, someone who changed a lot from the point of being appointed to the court over time to become the jurist that he was.
Yes, that's right.
I think that there's something great about that. I don't know. We work at an educational institution. Like, part of what we do is give our students more information and allow them to develop as the lawyer that they want to be, they feel that they should be. And part of that is changing your worldview. I mean, it's all about like becoming a lawyer. What that means is like thinking critically about the sources and evidence in front of you and developing a path forward. And I don't know, I think it's not just judicial independence to me. For me, there's like something really beautiful about like taking in information and allowing your position to grow and change based on what's out there.
Right.
But I think most people seem to think that the court had moved into such ideological, strident spaces that we weren't going to see it, which I think is what's fascinating a lot of people.
I think that's right. And so I was all doom and gloom, but I think that's a bright point. I mean, and that's a really good takeaway for people listening, is that the court sees itself as independent. And even the justices who are pretty predictable in terms of their the ideological stance of their decisions, they see themselves as independent, and that is a good thing. And Chief Justice Roberts, he is very concerned about the legacy of the court and the court as an institution, and that it be independent. So the fact that this was a narrow decision, and if it hadn't been tariffs, it would have gone the other way. I mean, that's not the court's fault. I mean, this is the case that came to them.
Great. I think that's also could be helpful for listeners.
Yeah.
When you say it's a narrow decision, can you talk a little bit about how much say does the court have in whether their decision is wide or narrow, and can they construe it as narrow? Aren't they supposed to? They're
supposed to. Generally speaking, you're supposed to decide things on as narrow grounds as possible.
Which is like a fascinating way to go forward.
And here they decided it very narrowly, and it's a narrow issue. So, I mean, sometimes you get cases that it's very clear they're going to be once in a generation, big impactful cases like Obergefell or, cases, the Brown v. Board. But sometimes a lot of the decisions are very narrow, and that's the way they should be because those are the questions presented. So the court takes only the cases it wants to, and it'll only take cases. It'll take cases if 4 justices agree, and most cases they don't. And of those cases they do take, most of them decide on pretty narrow grounds, and I think that's a good thing.
I have to say, years ago, right when Justice Roberts, maybe a couple of years after he was appointed, he came here to Rhode Island and he spoke at the federal courthouse.
Yep.
And he laid out very clearly that his role was to call balls and strikes.
Yes.
And it is always striking to me to watch how honest and forthright he was with our students, with the judicial staff when he said that, because he really has lived up to what he said he did.
And I think if you read his opinion for the court in this decision, I mean, it's a textbook example of being clear and concise and narrow. Mm-hmm. He's a very clear writer, and he doesn't beat around the bush. He's easy to understand, and he decided as much as he needed to decide, but not more.
I also find Gorsuch to be a particularly interesting case, not just in this case, but in some other cases, of don't count him out, don't expect him to be something, he will surprise you. And again, like, that gives me hope in the process, in the institution, and that's what the judiciary is supposed to be doing. And I think that there is a lot of chatter. I mean, I think that there are some times when it does seem very ideological. I think there's also a lot of chatter that maybe needs to be critically assessed further about how ideological is it when we still have these cases that are surprising.
That's right.
So if Rhode Islanders take one broader lesson about the constitutional structure from this case, what do you think it should be?
The court is not toothless. And the court is trying to exercise its independent judgment to the best of its ability. And here I think they got it right.
So I'm sorry to say that reminds me of something on The Housewives.
Of course it does.
and it's almost impossible for me to not say it. But if you're out there and a Housewives fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. All right. I guess my takeaway from this whole thing, and not that I'm one to give you excessive compliments, Greg, but I do feel really...
They talked about me in the whole case, so...
I do feel really lucky that, like, we have an international trade and tariff lawyer who can come on and talk to real Rhode Islanders about what's going on. I know you're, like, sometimes quoted in the news or whatever, but this is a long-form conversation where we pepper you with questions about what does this mean. And I don't know how many other people in the state of Rhode Island could sit here and get peppered with all these random questions like, what's a concurrence and what's a tariff, and still keep showing up to answer these questions.
And it wasn't just the 20-second soundbite that we're getting from the media. There was a lot more nuance than I expected to hear in this
It's a really fascinating topic. It has so many different implications. I mean, I was excited when the court took this case, and it came out the way I hoped it would.
Well, you did a fairly good job, but you're no Dolly Olympic.
So Nicole, as you know, always comes up with a fun question at the end of the podcast. So Nicole, what is our fun question of the day?
Okay, so Dean Gregory Bowman, you are from West Virginia.
I am from West Virginia.
And what is the name of the hometown?
Morgantown.
Morgantown, where the university is?
Where West Virginia University is.
Okay. We would like to know a fun fact about your hometown that Rhode Islanders and our listeners might not know.
Okay, so the West Virginia Mountaineers have the 13th...
Sorry, what is a mountaineer?
That's the team.
Okay, football. But what is a mountaineer?
People who are in the mountains.
They're called mountaineers? Are they called sea ears? Or like, is there another type of ear that you can describe? That's a weird word.
It's a weird question.
Well, yes.
So Mountaineers, they have the 13th most recognizable sports trademark with the flying WV. You've seen it. Everybody knows what it is. It's very recognizable.
Yeah.
So that was developed when I was about 12, by the university. And it's like the 12th or it's the 13th most recognizable.
Well, that is a fun fact. Yeah. What is a fun fact about your hometown?
Well, I think I'm from Quincy, Massachusetts. And I think everyone, if anyone knows anything, it's the city of presidents, John Quincy Adams. Mm-hmm. But it's actually the home of Dunkin' Donuts. The original Dunkin' Donuts was like a 5-minute walk from my parents' house.
Wow.
Which is really important here in the state of Rhode Island. Thank God for it.
Is it still there?
It is still there.
Do you ever go?
Yes. And it's funny because where it's located, it's situated in a place that can't have a very large parking lot. So it's sort of caught between like trying to look cool and retro and be a tourist attraction, but it really can't have that many customers. So it's if you find it, it's worth going to.
Sure. If you'll allow. Did you have Dunkin' Donuts in West Virginia when you were growing up?
Yeah.
Did they actually make the donuts in the like when I was growing up, when I was like a baby, there was actually someone who was making the donuts.
Yeah, time to make the donuts.
Right. And so I'm like so sad. I miss those days. Did you have someone that was out there actually making the donuts?
I don't know. I was a kid. I have no idea. I ate the donuts. That was my part.
Yes.
That was my job, and I did it very, very well.
What about you?
So I've moved a lot, so I don't know that I have a hometown per se, but I will go with Peekskill, New York, which where I lived at the time was called Peekskill. It has since been reorganized as Cortland Manor, but it was the home to Pee Wee Herman, and we were always very proud of that. It was also the home to the fictional school in The Facts of Life. So that's...
And it's one of those kill towns in New York, like Peekskill.
Yes.
It's a Dutch word?
Yes. I believe it means like stream.
Yeah, I think it does.
They should rename it Pee Wee Manor. That's what they should.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that that's entirely off the table.
He's back in vogue now.
Yeah. All right. With that being said, thank you everyone for listening, but especially thanks to you, Greg Bowman, our boss, for coming and talking to us about tariffs.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
You are the first guest to have been invited back for a second episode.
Surprisingly, our boss.
That wasn't my choice. And perhaps we could make this a regular occurrence where you are our international trade specialist. Would you be willing to do that?
I'll come back every time there's a Supreme Court decision on tariffs. So see me in 50 years.
That works for me.
and then we have some agreement on that. Anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. We are Law 401 Podcast. Try to remember to listen. New episodes come out on Tuesday. Like us, review us, rate us, give us stars. Watch us on YouTube, and also check us out on the WPRI 12 Plus app, where you can stream episodes. Thanks everybody, and
we'll see you next Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in to Law 401, Legal Issues Decoded from Roger Williams University School of Law. We'd like to thank our guests on the show today. The Law 401 podcast wouldn't be possible without the generous funding from the Hassenfeld Family Foundation. We'd also like to thank executive producer from RWU Law, Helga Melgar, the RWU Marketing and Communications team, podcast social media manager, Ali Michelle Conti, and our production partner, Focus Forward Media. The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Roger Williams University or our partners. For more Law 401 episodes and updates, follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts on YouTube or visit law.rwu.edu.